Hey everyone, I'm Siwen. In this video, we'll be following the Trieste as it journeys to what we currently know as the deepest place on Earth. The Mariana Trench. We all know that most of our planet is covered by oceans, with land making up less than 30%. So, a lot of people might think, surely humans must know the ocean pretty well by now, right? But in reality, we've only explored about 5% of the ocean. The other 95% is still a mystery to us. So, where is that 95% hidden? Well, it's mostly deep down in the deep sea, with the technology we have today. Exploring the shallow areas of the ocean is no problem at all. But when it comes to exploring the deep sea, it gets really difficult. For instance, let's compare it to space exploration. Take the moon, for example. Up to now, if we count Japan's moon landing this year, 5 countries have successfully managed a soft landing on the moon, and 12 astronauts have even walked on its surface. But now, look at ocean exploration. As for manned submersibles that have reached the deepest point of the Mariana Trench, up to this very moment, there are only 4 in the entire world. So, as far as humanity is concerned, the ocean is just as mysterious as space. The Mariana Trench, located in the western Pacific Ocean, stretches to a total length of 2,550 kilometers. With an average width of 70 kilometers. The deepest part is right at the bottom, in a trench called the Challenger Deep. It reaches a depth of about 11,034 meters below sea level. You could fit the entire Mount Everest inside it. That's incredibly deep, isn't it? So, in a place that deep, how did humans actually discover it? Back in 1872, the British Royal Navy's ship, the Challenger, was conducting a 3-year-long scientific expedition. There were over 220 crew members on board, and 5 scientists. As for the purpose of their mission, beyond the usual talk about humanity exploring the ocean, and exploring the unknown, their main goal was to verify one specific theory. It was a concept widely accepted in marine science at the time. The azoic theory, the idea that there was no life in the deep sea. It claimed that below 550 meters, nothing could survive. Looking back now, we know that's completely wrong. But back then, things were different. In those days, whenever the deep sea was mentioned, almost everyone believed that no living thing could survive down there. Because from a human perspective, we certainly couldn't survive. We couldn't handle the crushing pressure of the deep sea. Plus, it was pitch black with no light at all. So for a long time, people's view of the deep sea. After more than 2 years of sailing, in March of 1875, the Challenger arrived in the waters located east of Guam and the Mariana Islands. They used a dredge to probe areas deeper than 550 meters. And they discovered an incredible amount of life. And the creatures they hauled up just kept getting stranger and stranger. It didn't take long for everyone to realize that the azoic theory was completely dead wrong. The ocean was actually teeming with life. And there was one more thing that absolutely shocked them. During their voyage, besides their daily dredging work, they would toss a rope into the sea every few days. They had a lead weight tied to the other end. This was their way of measuring how deep the water was. The rope they were using was nearly 7,000 meters long. But in this particular area, even after they had lowered the entire length of the rope into the sea, the lead weight still hadn't hit the bottom. So, they kept adding more length to the rope. They kept at it until they had used up every bit of rope on the ship. A total of 8,184 meters of rope. And the lead weight still hadn't touched the seafloor. This depth was equivalent to, well, imagine turning Mount Everest upside down and dropping it into the ocean. So, in May of that same year, those 5 scientists on board gave their report. Regarding this expedition report, the report says the deepest point of the Mariana Trench is approximately 8,184 meters below sea level. And it is the deepest place on Earth. Plus, they also discovered a total of over 4,700 new life forms that hadn't been seen before. The results of this expedition caused quite a stir in the ocean science community back then. It could even be considered a scientific revolution. But as you can all see, this wasn't actually the deepest part of the Mariana Trench. However, due to the limited measurement technology at the time, it was 76 years later until humanity finally got an accurate measurement of the trench's depth. In the year 1951, The Challenger 2 returned to the Mariana Trench. This time the ship was equipped with new sonar technology. The goal was to finally figure out what the Mariana Trench actually looked like. They sent sound waves down to the ocean floor, and then used a stopwatch to record the time difference between when the signal was sent and when it returned. And just like that, the Challenger 2 mapped out the appearance of the Mariana Trench for the very first time. It is a massive canyon with an average depth of over 8,000 meters and a length stretching over 2,500 kilometers. And on the southern side of the trench, there is an abyss with a vertical drop of over 3,000 meters, which they named the Challenger Deep. It is currently known as the deepest part of the ocean, with a maximum depth of 11,034 meters. It's hard to believe there's a place that deep on Earth. Once this news was made public, it captured the interest of many people. Among them was a young man named Jacques Piccard. He said he wanted to give it a shot. He wanted to dive into the Mariana Trench and see for himself what kind of world existed in the deep sea. But the problem was, how could one actually get down there? Just then, he thought of someone. That was the American biologist William Beebe. Back in 1930, William Beebe and his friend Barton had jointly designed a diving sphere. This is a steel sphere. It's 1.42 meters in diameter. It weighs 2,250 kilograms. It has 3 small windows, each 20 centimeters wide. It can hold 2 people inside. The oxygen supply can keep those 2 people going for 6 hours. But because of the technological limitations at the time, it didn't have any propulsion system. So, if they wanted to go for a dive, they had to rely entirely on a steel cable to handle the lowering and the hauling back up. And right next to that cable, there was a rubber hose. Inside that hose, there was a telephone line and 2 electrical wires, which allowed for communication and lighting. Every 5 seconds, they would check in with the ship floating up on the surface. If that communication ever cut out, the bathysphere would be hauled back up immediately. Beebe and Barton used this diving sphere to descend over 900 meters deep into the waters of Bermuda. During the descent, he said he saw nothing but endless blue all around him. But as they went deeper and deeper into the ocean, the sunlight started to fade away. What he didn't expect, though, was that even in such a dark, empty environment, there was actually life. He even remarked that, "You'd have to be dead to sink to a depth like this." Later on, someone actually approached William Beebe and offered to pay, hoping he would take the diving sphere and plunge all the way into the Mariana Trench. Beebe replied, "If you want me dead, just say so." Of course, he was only joking. Beebe had actually calculated that for every 10 meters of ocean depth, the pressure increases by 1 atmosphere. To dive just over 100 meters deep, the sphere would have to withstand nearly 10 atmospheres of pressure. If you tried to take that sphere down into the Mariana Trench, never mind if the cable was even long enough, the ship on the surface might not even be able to handle the weight. Plus, at a depth of 10,000 meters in the deep sea, the sphere alone would have to withstand over 1,000 atmospheres of pressure. So, once the equipment runs into trouble, once things go wrong. So, unless we have more reliable diving equipment, relying on this bathysphere alone, no one would dare to try it. So, Jacques Piccard shared his thoughts with his father. He hoped his father could use Beebe's bathysphere design to create a better submersible. His father was an incredibly brilliant physicist, and many of you have probably heard of him. His name was Auguste Piccard. Take a look at this photo. It includes, among others, Albert Einstein, and many other legendary physicists. The man on the far left in the back row is Auguste Piccard. At the time, he was deeply interested in hot air ballooning. So he designed a pressurized aluminum spherical cabin. Inside it, a person wouldn't need a pressure suit to ascend to a very high altitude. So, on May 27, 1931, he boarded the hydrogen balloon he had designed himself, took off from Augsburg, Germany, and successfully reached an altitude of 15,781 meters, becoming the first human to enter the stratosphere. Later, after his son told him about his plans for deep-sea exploration, he realized that with just a few modifications to his aluminum spherical cabin, it could be used to dive into the ocean. So, he began designing a submersible. But due to the outbreak of World War II, things were delayed for a few years, and he didn't complete the design until 1945. This was the submersible he designed at the time. You can see that compared to the one Beebe made, it was quite different from the bathysphere. First of all, Auguste believed the steel cable had to go. Relying solely on a cable for descending and ascending is extremely limited. Because the amount of cable a ship can carry is finite. And it's also very dangerous. Underwater, the current would catch the cable, causing it to sway and whip back and forth constantly. So, the cable had to be replaced. And what would he replace it with? Don't forget, Auguste was an expert in hot air balloons. So on top of the manned cabin, he designed a float tank that looked just like a ship. It's filled with gasoline, but this gasoline isn't being used as fuel. It's actually being used to provide buoyancy. And these two tanks here are filled with iron pellets. Each tank can hold about 9 tons of iron pellets. Once they're filled up, it's ready to submerge, and when they want to resurface, they just release the iron pellets. This way, they can get rid of the steel cables entirely and move freely up and down in the ocean. Picard later named it the Trieste. From 1953 to 1957, over those 4 years, the Trieste completed 48 dives, deeper than 3,500 meters. This was all to test its deep-sea diving capabilities, and see if it could withstand the pressure of the deep sea. They also made a lot of modifications during this time. Finally, in 1958, the Trieste successfully dove to a depth of 7,315 meters, setting the deepest human diving record in history. With that, it was fully prepared to dive into the Mariana Trench. But since Auguste Picard was getting on in years, and the mission to the Mariana Trench was quite risky, they ultimately decided not to let him go. Instead, they sent his son and a 28-year-old U.S. Navy lieutenant named Don Walsh to take on the mission. On January 23, 1960, Jacques Picard and Don Walsh boarded the Trieste and officially began their descent into the Mariana Trench. At the start of the dive, right around that 0 to 40 meter range, the two of them were actually quite excited, because this area is full of coral reefs and schools of fish. Besides, many recreational divers these days are capable of reaching this depth. So, at this level, the two of them sitting in the cockpit still felt fairly relaxed, but as they descended to 100 meters, the atmosphere started to change. For one thing, the light began to fade, and the blue outside grew deeper and deeper. Plus, outside their cockpit window, every now and then, it's making these weird cooing and clucking noises. And so, the two of them started to get nervous pretty quickly. They were even getting a bit scared, and by the time they descended below 200 meters, there wasn't a single ray of sunlight left around them. So, they turned on the submersible searchlights. But in these conditions, the lights could barely illuminate anything more than 10 meters away. They had expected it to be pitch black. But suddenly, they saw a bunch of little glowing dots. They took a closer look and realized it was actually fish. But these fish looked absolutely terrifying. Their mouths were full of teeth, and they even came with their own built-in lights. So they immediately reported what they saw to the ship on the surface. By the time they reached a depth of 1,000 meters, their communications became extremely unstable. It was probably due to the intense pressure, because the pressure down there was equal to 92 atmospheres. As we mentioned before, it's about the same as the pressure on the surface of Venus. The two of them checked everything but couldn't find the cause. A few minutes later, they lost contact with the surface completely. Even though they lost contact, the two of them chose not to head back up. Instead, they kept on descending. Before long, they reached a depth of 3,800 meters. That's the depth where the Titanic sank. On April 15, 1912, this luxury cruise ship, which was touted as unsinkable, sank after hitting an iceberg while crossing the Atlantic. Out of over 2,000 people, more than 1,500 of them died in that disaster. When they went past 9,000 meters deep, suddenly they heard the sound of glass cracking. The glass in front of their cockpit had cracked. At that moment, Don Walsh thought, maybe we should just head back up. It's too dangerous to keep going down, especially since the glass is already cracked. A depth of over 9,000 meters was already far beyond any previous record. But Jacques Picard said no. Since we're already here, it would be a total waste if we didn't dive all the way to the bottom. And so, the two of them finally decided to keep descending. Luckily, the glass didn't crack any further. Finally, 5 hours after they first entered the water, they reached the lowest point of the Mariana Trench, the Challenger Deep. This is the deepest known place on Earth. Their instrument panel showed that the water depth here reached 10,916 meters. but they didn't find anything particularly special down there, because even with their lights on, they could only see within 10 meters of their surroundings. Plus, with the glass already cracked, they only stayed for 20 minutes before starting their ascent. As they surfaced, they saw everyone on the ship cheering for them, including Jacques Picard's father, Auguste. He was reminded of many years ago when he was a little boy, and had greeted his own father just like this. It was when his father returned from a hot air balloon flight. His father had loved adventure his whole life, and loved taking on challenging feats. And now, his son had become the first person to ever reach the Mariana Trench, and make it back successfully. So, in a way, he had carried on his father's spirit of exploration. The story of Jacques Picard and Don Walsh exploring the Mariana Trench spread across the world very quickly. A 6-year-old boy in Ontario, Canada, saw the report on television. This little boy had been fascinated by the deep sea since he was small. When he grew up, he became even more passionate about deep-sea diving, having dove down to the Titanic wreckage 33 times. And on March 26, 2012, he traveled alone in the deep-sea Challenger, reaching the Mariana Trench in just over 2 hours. He even stayed down in the trench for 3 hours, becoming the second person in human history to reach the Mariana Trench, and the first to do it solo. That man was James Cameron, the director of the movie Titanic. A few years later, April 29, 2019, Victor Vescovo piloted the limiting factor submersible down into the Challenger Deep of the Mariana Trench, and he set a Guinness World Record for the person who has traveled the greatest vertical distance without leaving the Earth's surface. Because back in 2010, he climbed Mount Everest, so he has been to both the highest and lowest points on Earth, with a total vertical distance reaching 19,772 meters. November 10, 2020, China's Fenduji, or Striver, successfully reached the Challenger Deep of the Mariana Trench at a depth of 10,909 meters. This also marks the deepest dive into the Challenger Deep, with the largest number of people to date, because there were 3 people on board. At the same time, this made China the 5th country in the world to master deep-sea manned submersible technology. And currently, there are only 2 submersibles in the world capable of carrying humans to depths of 10,000 meters. One is America's limiting factor, and the other is the Fenduji. When Jacques Picard and Don Walsh originally returned from, Jacques Picard was asked, "What on earth did you actually see down there at the bottom of the sea?" Picard replied, "The seafloor is not the desolate wasteland we imagined. Although the water temperature is extremely low, only about 2.4 degrees Celsius, there are still animals like sea cucumbers and sea anemones. And beneath the sediment." He said he even saw shrimp. But at the time, their claim was met with a lot of skepticism from many people. And some scientists even accused them of talking nonsense. They believed it was simply impossible for any living creature to withstand the extreme pressure of the 10,000-meter deep sea. But now we know that life does indeed exist on the ocean floor. And the kind of shrimp Picard described really does exist. We now call this shrimp an amphipod. Moreover, recent research has discovered that the bodies of these amphipods contain a chemical substance called skylo-inositol, which might be what allows these creatures to survive. The key to being able to live under the extreme pressure of the deep sea. So I've been thinking, for these creatures, the deep sea environment isn't harsh at all. It's actually comfortable. Anyway, humanity's journey to understand the ocean has been a very long one. It wasn't until the 16th century that we figured out just how vast the ocean really is, and not until the 20th century that we understood how deep it goes. And the Mariana Trench is just one of many trenches beneath the sea. Our knowledge of it remains extremely limited, but through research, scientists have found signs of microorganisms in the trench. These microbes have incredibly slow metabolic rates, and can live for tens of thousands or even millions of years. Creatures like these are definitely worth our time to study. Perhaps one day in the future, they might help us answer where life truly comes from, and where we go after we die.